Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Akakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aqua family. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai, and back in here with another quick and as well as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I just wanted to go through and add a little bit of and just my quick 2 cents in regards to a lesson that was done by the elder in Dallas in regards to how sometimes, she might be right? And basically, I kind of wanted to do my own and put in my own 2 cents in regards to how the Lord can use a woman to basically humble you. And it's very, very, I guess it's mostly pertains to, brothers that actually might have a woman or might have, or you might live with a family member that is a woman, right? And in these situations, it's always important to essentially stay spiritual and to also filter what they say as well, because sometimes the Lord can use them to basically point out something that is within you, right? And sometimes it might feel very uncomfortable, but through the process of and through the skill, I should say, of constantly self-examination, these things do become easier, right? So they might be pointing out something within yourself that might be, that actually might be true about yourself, right? And, if if you have that habit of constantly, going through self-examination, you might realize and come to a conclusion and understand that, what this person is actually saying is actually right about me, and I can address this and I can actually improve on this, right? So, I kind of just want to touch on this real topic. I guess this mostly pertains just to brothers and, who actually might have a woman, might be dealing with a woman, and whether they might have a family or, or you might live with a relative, so to speak. That might be, a woman, and they might be essentially pleased to dwell with you, right? And then they look at you as an example of actually how to be, right? So all these things do happen. Yes, we are in the flesh, but sometimes these things do occur, right? Not to say that all they say is right, because the scriptures talk about how the Lord hath not have deprived her of understanding, right? So, a lot of the things that they might say is a lot of, BS sometimes, but, sometimes what they do say it can be on point too, especially if it's about you, right? So I just wanted to touch on this real quick. I didn't have anything written down, but I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson may be edifying, right? And so I'll just start off here in Sirach, the 10th chapter. This is verse 18, and it says, "Pride was not made for men, nor furious anger of them that are born of a woman." Right. So this, I wanted to read this because, one of the things that, especially if you have very, I don't want to say, I'll say it like this: if you have very little experience, especially with controlling, like emotional control, right? That sentiment, that feeling to essentially refute what they say, because we're the men, and yes, we know that the Lord's pasture and the flock of the Lord's pasture are men. That is true. But sometimes the Lord can use them to be able to point out something about you, right? And it's not to basically become prideful. And what a good story that illustrates this in a sense is when you go back into the kings of Judah, right? There was a king that came from the line of David named Uzziah, right? So, and he was, I believe he was about 16 years old when he began to reign. So, at that point, he was actually doing very good. The scriptures talk about how he was very, very skillful and knowledgeable, whether it was within weapons and husbandry, right? So somebody who does a lot of planting, somebody who invests in agriculture. Now, he was one of the good kings of the southern kingdom, but there was a point in his administration, in his sovereignty, in his rulership, where he went far left. So he essentially, what he began to do, and which was his I guess you can say his transgression, was that he began to burn incense onto he was burning incense, and that is not the role of the king. That was the role of a priest, right? That's a priestly duty, right? And eventually what happens was, there was a band, I believe it was about 81 priests that came in, and they were telling him, like, this is a duty that is not this is not a duty that is not allocated towards you, right? This is not your role, right? And essentially he was very wroth. He couldn't receive what the priests were saying. So what happens is the Lord ends up intervening and smiting him with leprosy, right? So saying this all to say, pride, is one of those things where, it's not one of the most pleasing things, and it's not made for men, right? We don't really have anything to boast in. But when you're younger and you don't have a lot of emotional control, and you have all this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding like within you, we tend to get, myself included, I'm very guilty of this, was we get puffed up, right? And Paul talks about that, right? As a matter of fact, let me get that. Excuse me. Okay, this is 1 Corinthians 8, verse 1, and it says, now as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. And it says, knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth, right? So one of the things that comes with having understanding is that it can puff up your mind, right? So thinking that you cannot essentially be corrected, or you cannot be essentially corrected, right? And the Lord might use a woman, and can use a woman to correct you, right? And I'm saying this also from experience, right? These things do happen, right? So, and one of the things that makes this, what's the word I'm looking for? That makes this, receiving what they say a little bit more gracefully, is that when you examine yourself and you realize, okay, this person is saying something that's actually truthful, I'm not going to refute what they're saying, right? I'm going to be able to look within myself and be like, okay, I can actually work on this particular area. Now, I can't really say, as someone just making this lesson right now, I don't know, what brothers, might have to work on, right? In particular things, right? In my situation, in my case, it was something very, not very major. I didn't consider at the time, but it was something that was actually true. So I didn't actually refute what this person was saying, right? So let me get this in Proverbs here. This is Proverbs chapter 20, verse 12, and it says, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord Yahweh, Bashem Shai, hath made even both of them, right? So the ability to actually take in what this person is saying, and like, okay, maybe the Lord is actually using this person to actually speak to me and tell me something. Is this actually true about myself? And sometimes, what they say may not be true, but sometimes it actually might be true, but only through, I'll say this, 100%, only through self-examination and being by yourself to get more of that understanding of the type of person, that you are, and understanding your flesh and understanding a lot of your positive tendencies and understanding negative tendencies. A lot of that understanding is so important. So you're not essentially, through that skill of constant self-examination, you'll know, okay, what this person was actually saying was on point, or what, this person their assessment wasn't the greatest, right? So I can actually refute not refute, I should say, but I can actually disregard what they're saying. I can dismiss it. But if it's true, it may be not very healthy to dismiss it, right? Because the Lord can just be using that woman in your specific environment to actually tell you something, right? So I'll read it again, and it says, Proverbs chapter 20, verse 12, and it says, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them, right? So being able to hear and comprehend what is actually being said, and essentially subjecting your own emotions, right? And essentially, I don't want to say putting wisdom to the side, but essentially not allowing the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding to kind of puff you up to the point where you're unable to receive that correction, right? So let me go here, something that Paul said also. Okay, this is 1 Corinthians 2 verse 15, and it says, but he that is spiritual judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man, right? So it being spiritual also in those situations. So there's three pretty much main things that can basically help within this situation, right? The first is having emotional control, having the ability to problem solve, very well without actually getting heated, right? And being able to stay spiritual too, and self-examine, right? And self-examination, because that's from my experience, what has actually helped myself in those situations that might have felt uncomfortable, right? And it would give me a lot more comfort to be in being able to receive what they actually were saying, because it wasn't, because of self-examination. Because the self-examination, it wasn't a shock. If you weren't the type of person to self-examine, it might be a shock to you. And I understand, okay, I still have problems. Yahushua said, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick, right? I can still acknowledge I am sick and I need a physician, right? Kind of like the woman that was holding, and she wanted to grab Yahushua's garment, right? That's the spirit, that I can recognize that even for myself, I am in, I should say, right? But the point is self-examination. You weren't essentially caught off guard if you constantly do it, right? So those three main things I just wanted to hit, in regards to this situation, because the Lord can use a woman to do so, right? So that's pretty much it. I didn't want to make the lesson too long, but just something I kind of wanted to add to the point of one of what the elders said, and just put in my 2 cents, for brothers that actually have a woman, and can actually being able to discern what they actually say, because sometimes what they say, it might be nonsense, right? Sometimes it might be very, very spiritual too, right? Maybe not directly at you, but sometimes the Lord might be using her to talk to you and tell you something about yourself, right? So but the skill of being discerning and remaining spiritual in that situation, does help, to navigate this particular situation, right? So, anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was quick, straightforward, and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.